So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted that our keynote speaker this afternoon, who will be joining me in conversation, is Dr. Tony Juniper, CBE, Chair of Natural England. Tony will be offering his thoughts to us on the state of nature recovery in England and then join me in conversation. But I'm sure that there is no shortage of issues that you guys all want to be asking Tony about. So naturally, I'm going to leave plenty of time for questions, and please think about those questions so we can maximise his time that he's got here on the stage with us. There's people with bats, show your name, yeah, okay, so if you keep eye contact with those people if you do want to ask a question, or with me, and I'll try and get to everybody in order. So for now, Tony, welcome to the Norfolk Landscapes Conference.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much indeed, Emily. It's a great pleasure to be here and to offer a few opening reflections before joining in a conversation with Emily, who I think has got some questions prepared. The state of nature in 2025, there's much to be said about that, and maybe we'll say something more when we sit down to discuss in more detail in a moment. But what I did want to do is just to paint a picture maybe of some of the context that we're working in at the moment, because we've got these huge twin challenges in front of us at the moment in terms of sustaining food security for an expanding global population of 8 billion people going towards 10 billion by the end of this century, at the same time as we're leaning into these really quite challenging ecological questions and witness the decline of abundance of wildlife, the ever-lengthening species of animals and plants that are heading towards extinction, and of course the loss of entire ecosystems that's going on at the moment. There's a really quite a challenging list of questions that we need to be thinking about. And as we think about that, the conversation kind of goes up and down in prominence, and it's quite a changing picture that we face almost from year to year in terms of how seriously society looks at these twin challenges, never mind the connections between them. And in thinking about that changing context, I'm just inclined to think of an idea that the US military came up with in the late 1990s. They came up with the idea of a VUCA world, V-U-C-A, and that stands for a world that is volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous, VUCA. And if you just think about that for a moment, this is the world that we are now in. And in the late 1990s, it was becoming more evident that this was the case, that the world was becoming more volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. But we really are now in it, I think it's fair to say. And therefore, the interrogation of these big questions of food security and ecological decline, they are against that backdrop. And this really matters because it does then inform how we have to deal with these big questions. Take the volatility in British politics lately. I've been chair of Natural England for 6.5 years, and in that time there has been 5 prime ministers, 6 chancellors of the Exchequer and 8 secretaries of state for the environment. I'm old enough to remember when prime ministers used to last for 10 years. Do you remember that? Tony Blair, Margaret Thatcher, that just seems like ancient history. We're in a world now that is volatile in a political sense. It's also uncertain and volatile on the global stage. Look at the impact of President Trump. He's been in office for a year, a complete revolution in terms of how the global system now works, in terms of the trading system, the way in which security issues are managed, and of course his scepticism on climate change will have a real impact on the global effort to reduce emissions. And then there is the volatility that's coming with actual conflict. Look at the effect of the war in Ukraine. This had a very significant and very rapid effect on both energy and food prices in this country, in part linked to the rise of gas prices, then feeding through into fertilizer prices, impact on global commodity markets. That pushed up the cost of living in this country, which then led a lot of people in politics and commentating in the media to say that nature recovery is no longer a priority. We should focus only on food production in order to bring prices down. And you see that feeding through also into the climate space in terms of people suggesting that we should open up more of our own oil and gas reserves rather than thinking about emissions reductions longer term. And so these things kind of have knock-on effects, and they feed into this environmental and ecological discussion, and indeed into the discussions about the price of food and what we should do about that. And also you can see there being now some faltering of established ideas, for example, around how we conduct economic development and economic growth, with every effort being made by the current government and last governments to boost economic GDP growth in the country, and that is finding various challenges, which is then pushing back into calls for a reduction in environmental ambition and environmental regulation. And then you find that the real world changes linked to climate change and the ecological degradation, which is seen, for example, in the degradation of soils, which is then having impacts on food productivity, and then that in turn affecting farm businesses and the price of food. All of these things are interconnected. All of them are of huge significance in how we address the conversation going on here today about how we are going to link up food security and nature recovery into the future. So that's the backdrop. Against all of that, there is some very good news and some really positive stuff going on. So if you look at the national policy development that's happening in England at the moment, we have quite a lot of really good things in play. Local nature recovery strategies, those are coming through in different parts of the country, including here in Norfolk and in Suffolk. We have an emerging land use framework that hopefully can enable us to make sense of all these interlocking, competing demands that we have for land in this country, whether it's housing development, infrastructure, food production, what we're going to do to adapt to climate change and to conserve biodiversity. All those things are related and they need a common framework to be made sense of. That's coming hopefully in the near future. We have a revised environmental improvement plan, which hopefully will give more structure and shape to the work that needs to be done going forward. And then, of course, we have a lot of tried and trusted methods in the form of protected areas and species recovery plans, which we've been doing for years, which are still there in the background, but hopefully now going to be bolstered through the use of some of these new tools. So on top of all of that, there is, of course, a lot of activity going on outside the policy space, and some of that is being discussed here today in terms of the work of farmer clusters and this emerging area of private sector investment into nature recovery, two other very exciting areas of work that are going on in parallel. For us at Natural England, trying to make sense of all of this is one of the things that we're constantly doing. Many of you will know us as an official agency that does regulation, and we do regulation. We notify sites of special scientific interest, and we also have a role in the planning system in terms of our regulatory functions, but we do so much more than that, including being an advisor to government on the policies and decisions that government needs to adopt. And also we are a delivery body working with government as partners to give effect to some of the schemes that they bring forward, including the Environmental Land Management Scheme, which is of huge significance in the conversation we're having today, including through this very new exciting policy of landscape recovery, of which there are 6 in Norfolk, and which are all extremely exciting in being able to really create scale in terms of how we approach these twin questions of food production and nature recovery. So by way of introduction, I'll leave it there, and very happy, Emily, to take any questions that you have. Thank you.
I was going to spend all afternoon chasing my pen.
Oh, you're off that pen again still?
Sorry.
Okay.
Just in case.
Right. Is that yours or mine?
That's yours.
Thank
That's
you.
yours. You've got bugs apparently.
I've
so
got a horrible cold, yeah.
Tony.
Or worse, I don't know what it is.
Okay. Oh, welcome to Norfolk. Thank
you.
you very much for coming over.
Yeah.
The genesis of this event, as I explained earlier, was this realise that Norfolk really was at the cutting edge of many of the challenges facing landscapes and the emerging policy around nature recovery. Flooding, water quality, the role of productive farming, all of these things that we know, can cause conflict. And so bringing people together really was what this was all about. So just as an intro, what's your perception of today's event and also the role of events like this in driving forward some of these conversations?
Well, the first thing to note is just how many people are here doing so many different things. This is one English county, and probably says a lot just about how much of the effort that's going on in England for nature at the moment is concentrated here. And the east of England does seem to be a very busy place from the point of view of these efforts to try and link agriculture and nature together. And there's quite a lot going on, isn't there? There's Natural Capital East, which is a new thing, which is combining various private sector and public sector organisations. There's Wild East, which is a landowner-led thing, isn't it? And then there's Water Resources East, which is bringing all these different elements together to look at water in the county. And then, real leadership going on here from the point of view of, there's 6 landscape recoveries in Norfolk, which I think probably is more than any other county. Don't quote me on that. But it does seem like there's an awful lot happening here. And also things like the Norfolk Ponds project, which has got national profile through the work they're doing in restoring ghost ponds. So it does seem like this is a place for leadership in England in terms of how we're approaching this interface between agriculture and nature.
Yeah. Thank you for validating how awesome I think Norfolk is as well.
Okay,
That's really good.
I live in neighbouring Cambridgeshire, by the way, I consider myself local.
Not too far away. No, I was just thinking of things that become truly successful lose the East, right? As in Agritech E, who've now right. So we will know when these things have become truly successful. Become national. That's okay. So one of the things I wanted to ask you, and actually as a new chair of an arm's length body, I'll be particularly interested in your answer to this. It's sort of coping with fatigue. You mentioned it, the 8 secretaries of state in 6 years. It's extraordinary. So to an extent, arm's length bodies can provide that kind of continuity. But I was thinking about the grassroots delivery and the projects who are here in particular. They're often run by volunteers. They've got limited cluster funding, and they will run out of steam if results aren't forthcoming. Right, that's what really worries me. So what's your advice to projects who are waiting on political decisions? This volatility, it's not going to help anybody get stuff done.
No, it's not. I know, I pick this up all the time from people who are doing practical things on the ground, whether it's in farms or it's in projects, that we just don't know what's going on, and there's this constant kind of delay and then rolling over for a year, and even in the Natural England context, our budgets really, we don't have certainty beyond a year very often, and it makes it quite hard to plan, to hire people, and to be able to know that we've got the resources to carry a piece of work on over more than 1 year, and it is problematic, and it is an inevitable consequence of the people and the personalities changing.
Yep.
So we've got all the secretaries of state, they come in and they've got perfectly good motivations, but they need to look at, the portfolio before they can go ahead and say, actually, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this. And, work that's like 9/10 done, it stops until the new Secretary of State has had a chance to look at it, and they may say, actually, I think we need to do this a little bit differently or that a little bit differently, and then another 6 months elapses before we finish up with a final decision. And so 8 Secretaries of State over 6.5 years, this does explain, I think, quite a lot of the delay and uncertainty that we've had around some of these big decisions that people do need to have made in order to be able to make their own decisions in terms of how they're going to run their farm business, for example.
And so your top tip for getting to know new Secretaries of State?
Well, there's no time. They change.
Really? So don't bother.
Well, no, that wouldn't be fair. We're quite close in, and so we do get to meet them, and we get to talk to them, and we help them understand what we're trying to do and where we can assist in what their ambition is through their policy agenda.
Do you feel it's shifting though slightly because there's that frequent turnover and because of the nature of politics now that they're asking you for your advice more? As an organisation, do you feel that you're able to provide more continuity?
Yeah, I think we are continuity, actually. And, some of the people working in Natural England, some of them are here today, they've been around for a very long time and they really know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so the more that we can connect them into bringing that wisdom into the political domain, but it's a big machine. I mean, DEFRA has thousands of civil servants working in there, multiple processes with multiple streams of work. It's quite a hard institution to navigate. And I think one of the things about DEFRA, which is a huge opportunity if only we can master it, is to be able to draw together some of these big pieces that on the one side are linked to water, and there's another piece linked to farming, and there's a bit more linked to nature recovery, and another piece which is about climate adaptation. And how do we fit all these things together? Because in the landscape, all these things, of course, are related in a particular bit of a river catchment.
Yep.
But in government, they're siloed and separated very often from each other. And so that is a huge challenge.
Absolutely. It's something we come up at AHDB, also sort of, we speak quite a lot to DBT or the Department of Health. It's not even within DEFRA, it's not just a DEFRA problem. And so, I'm very interested in how the industry, in its broader sense, farmers or farming, or the landscape or the sort of nature recovery environment can kind of work with the arm's length bodies more in order to kind of embody that kind of idea in a way that civil service internally to government doesn't seem to be able to.
No, so one of the things we try to do is to have as much contact on the ground with people in order to be able to do some of that joining up in localities and different ways of doing that. One of them at the moment is landscape recovery, where we are able to draw different actors together in a geographical location to do things together. But it's not easy. No. I mean, it's like a big bowl of spaghetti, and trying to find your way through it is sometimes quite challenging.
Absolutely. So I wanted to pick up on a specific example, which I saw written up in the Farmers Weekly last week about the Leinster Farmers Group up in Cumbria. It's John Geldar's project. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but. It was really interesting. I don't know if anybody read it in the Farmers Weekly, but have got around the constraints of public finance. It sort of started as a landscape recovery project, but hadn't been successful in the first round. And so it was a really lovely write-up because it was saying we didn't get the money, but we got on with it anyway through sheer determination and plenty of community spirit. And they'd got the scouts involved in building bird boxes and some really, really interesting things. And it struck me as a really good example of energy being driven from the ground up. But I wondered if you thought this might be a route that you think other projects will end up having to follow.
Because they didn't manage to achieve. Well, there's multiple ways of doing this, of course, and some of it is going to be done through people bringing together groups of volunteers. Others are going to be done in partnership with private sector. Others are going to be driven principally by policy and government schemes, and some will be all three of those. And I think the models, they will be highly variable depending on where the people are and what the challenges are locally and what opportunities they have for connecting with some of these funding streams. And so, landscape recovery, some of them are, I think, beginning to pull in private finance. Others are finding it more challenging. Some are going to rely more on government money. Some are going to rely more on what private investors will put in. And so I think it is really, it's highly localised and it is very specific about the place where people are working, I think. And that really is then about the importance of this bottom-up and this fostering of common cause in particular localities. I think that is going to be the thing that's going to be able to make the difference on all of this, especially considering, these points I made a moment ago about this very volatile and uncertain world that we're now in.
Yep.
Building that social capital in localities, getting people to work together, building partnerships, finding ways to collaborate, and doing that through our own energies as much as we can, whilst hopefully drawing upon these external resources, whether it's policy or whether it's private finance. I think that's what we're going to have to do.
It's interesting. There was a great talk over in that corner, one of the first talks this morning from a researcher from the UEA. I don't know if she's still here, but talking about the social capital of cluster farms and kind of actually how having facilitators, really working, but mapping where all the clusters are. Because, they're quite organic. Nobody really knows where they are, but sort of that idea of social capital and just bringing people together. And particularly, you don't just work with farmers, do you? It's not a landscape thing. It's nature into urban areas too, and the importance of understanding what benefit that brings to people, right?
Definitely.
It's much bigger than we may think.
Oh, for sure. And so nature, from the Natural England perspective, it's as much about the urban environment as it is about rural ones. And actually, it's quite interesting just how the political focus has shifted over the last year. And so up until the middle of last year and the general election, it was very much the case that nature was strongly linked with farming in terms of the policy discussion and where the political interest lay. But now you will see, and I think you said this earlier on, this big focus on development and housing and infrastructure, and nature being, well, not so much blended with it, but seen as a barrier to all of that. And so it's interesting how the locus has shifted and the attention has moved from the rural more to the kind of built development sector. But notwithstanding those points about, nature being perceived to be a blocker for development, and it isn't really, not in the greater scheme of things. For us, the linkage with the built environment is about the opportunities to do things in ways which are going to be much better for people in terms of creating environments where people would want to live. I mean, it's no accident that houses that are in green spaces by a river, they're much more expensive than houses that don't have any of that. I mean, it's obvious, isn't it? And so creating those kinds of spaces in the future that foster health and well-being through clever design that brings in nature as part of the built development, we're putting quite a lot of effort into that at the moment, not least because of this huge health and well-being dimension. This is another one of the big challenges on the agenda right now, alongside economic growth, is this, big challenge of public health and the public health services struggling to keep up with all of these, chronic long-term illnesses, depression, anxiety, inactivity, and some of the illnesses that come with that. One of the remedies, not the only one by any means, but one of the remedies is to enable people to spend more time in beautiful surroundings outside. And so there's a strong synergy then between how we conceive built development for the future, making it beautiful, making it rich in wildlife, and then also how that's going to have a beneficial effect on future public health service demand.
There's clearly been so much of it that's been built without that in mind, then, and that's what makes me worry. And I think that's kind of like where we get to, though, in kind of like my theme and kind of thinking about this idea of landscape adaptation, is that I do worry that we're spending too long obsessing over preserving the past rather than preparing for a livable future. And some of the, really contested issues in Norfolk sort of show this up, particularly around reedbed management and the marshes and, the legal claims that have been going on here, particularly with abstraction being an issue. And yet we've got this seemingly unstoppable force of climate change, which is going to transform our habitats probably forever. So how are you reconciling these policy objectives that speak to nature recovery with the likelihood, as we now see it, that we're going to get 2 degrees of warming by 2050 and all of the severe pressures and enforced changes that's going to place on coasts, species and people?
Yeah, so it does look like that level of warming is now inevitable. We're on the 3rd year now where we've had an average global temperature above 1.5 degrees. Emissions in 2024 were the highest in history. Maybe it's going to peak this year, but we're still pumping into the atmosphere billions of tons of carbon, which is adding to that heat-trapping layer of greenhouse gases. So we're probably going to get to 2 degrees inevitably. And if you look at the policies that have been adopted globally at the moment, it looks like more like 3 degrees is going to be the temperature increase by the end of this century, which would be truly, so you use the word catastrophic, but if you look at what that means for ecosystems and for the impacts on agriculture, for example, I mean, it is quite frightening. So we're going to have to do quite a level of adaptation, irrespective of how quickly we can cut the emissions, because we're already committed to 2, and as I say, maybe heading towards 3 degrees of global warming. So what does adaptation mean? Well, it means a number of things. And, obviously it's about infrastructure, it's about water supplies, it's about food security, but it's also about the natural world and the extent to which our native habitats are going to be able to cope with that level of warming. And if you look at the basic ecology on this, what we're going to have to do is to create bigger patches of natural habitat that are connected with one another. I mean, that's the basic upshot. And if we can do that in ways which are going to help to reduce flood risk, which are going to help to reduce extreme heat in urban areas, and there's another reason why blending trees, scrub, grasslands and wetlands into new housing development, this is a hedge on climate change in the sense of being able to hold water and to help lower temperatures, because all that green space does do that. It helps to cool down urban areas. That kind of thinking we need to be embracing now, because if we try to adapt to 2 degrees of global warming when we are at 2 degrees, it's going to be very difficult. If we can make intelligent and informed decisions now about how we anticipate that and undertake proper land use planning, infrastructure design, urban design, in order to be able to anticipate it, never mind what we might do for agriculture, this is going to be a far more sensible and economically rational way of approaching it. But the trouble is, I think, so much of our behaviour, it's quite reactive, isn't it? To, we wait for the disaster and then we deal with it after the event rather than trying to think 20, 30 years hence. And I don't think we're very good at that. And actually the Adaptation Committee, who advise government, they're a subcommittee of the Climate Change Committee, they basically have said that we really haven't put enough effort into this, or indeed any effort, really.
And in terms of the targets that are driving kind of how Natural England thinks, that you mentioned the reform of the Environmental Improvement Plan and the targets that you're being held accountable to, do you think that they are sufficient to think about adaptation? Or, are they helping or hindering?
They could be. The Environmental Improvement Plan has not been published. I mean, this is another bit of the uncertainty. So that was going to be a review over a few months, July 2024. It's now nearly November 2025, and we've still not seen that review. We're assuming that the targets are going to be pretty much as they were before, 30% of the country protected and managed for nature by 2030, a 2030 goal to halt the decline of species with a view to recovering by 2042 or whatever it was. So, those broad targets I think are still there. It's the follow-through and it's the integrated delivery which is the big challenge. And this brings me back to a point I made a moment ago about drawing together all of these different tools we've got and being able to deliver them in particular geographical locations so that we can make the most of what we would put in as Natural England in terms of nature recovery, what the Environment Agency can do in terms of flood reduction, what the Forestry Commission can do with trees, what a water company could do in terms of how they might adopt nature-based solutions, and drawing these things together in ways whereby we can actually get more out of all these individual funding streams.
Where's that collaboration happening, though?
Well, we try and foster it as best we can in locations. Yeah, there isn't really a formal framework for that. And this is where I think there are some big opportunities. The local nature recovery strategy should help. I think it's a mindset thing, actually. I think it's really about people who are in these different organisations just thinking about how they can get more out of what they're doing through partnership rather than just focusing on their own tram lines.
Yeah, well, I was thinking that some kind of get-together, at least of, the chairs of the arms length.
Oh, we do that,
yeah,
we do that. Yeah, we do that.
Yeah.
And for some years I've been having regular meetings with the chair of the Environment Agency and Forestry Commission on exactly this.
Yeah.
How can we deploy our impact in a much more coordinated way in particular places?
Yeah.
Place-based delivery is the jargon that is in...
Include the food system.
Yeah, indeed. Well, indeed, but that's just those 3 agencies, but it goes wider.
Absolutely. Audience, questions. I'm sure there will be loads. Stick your hand up so that somebody with a table tennis bat can come and find you. One at the back first. Martin moved quickest. Sorry, Joan, there's a question here at the front if somebody wants to.
Hi, Andy Duff from Swallowtail. I'm just interested in the land use framework and how far you think that's going to resolve some of the issues or just amplify the already some of the divisions and arguments that already exist around land use.
Yeah, the answer is I don't know. So the consultation was launched, was it last February, wasn't it? So it was 8 months ago. And government is just now working through the responses to that. I noted, when it came, some people kind of welcomed it, other people were very much against it. And there is, a big political question in the idea of a land use framework from the point of view of government in terms of how much, government should tell people what to do in inverted commas. And I don't think it is in that spirit. It's really about how we come up with a way of optimising land use in the country. So, for example, would we wish to put solar panels on our best farmland where we could be growing, crops with the highest yields? Probably not. Would we want to be building houses in areas that are going to flood? Probably not. Would we want to conserve our peatlands for their carbon storage rather than digging them up? Yes, we probably would. And so once you've kind of got that broad understanding of what optimal land use looks like for different parts of the country, then you can start to reflect that in spatial planning and in the incentives that government has to encourage things to happen in particular places rather than to legislate. So ELM is a good example, of course, environmental land management, how you might target some of that. So I can't answer your question in terms of what it's going to look like, but I think probably it will be that. It will be an approach that helps us to understand what's the best thing in a particular place. Oh, and the other thing, of course, is multifunctionality and being able to identify those places where, for example, simultaneously you could do flood risk reduction, carbon capture, nature recovery and public health and well-being all in the same place, and to be able to target resources so that we can unlock those multiple benefits out of looking at things you can do all at once in the same area. So those will be the kinds of things. Optimization, multifunctionality and incentive targeting, I think probably is what it will say.
Do you think it's more likely to be technological or community focused? Because, you know, I think well, there was a great comment made, Norfolk Wildlife Trust, Elliot, talking earlier about the importance of engaging with communities when it comes to land use change.
Yeah, well, it's critical, isn't it? I mean, at the end of the day, you know, you can have as much kind of rationality as you like in terms of where it's best place to put houses or solar panels or anything else, but if you don't have the community with you, you've got a problem. And so engaging people is a critically important part of it. And I don't know what it will say about that. There's a whole other thing going on at the moment with the planning system, of course. I forgot to mention this, and mentioned this earlier on, the planning and infrastructure bill, and you know, some of the challenges therein.
I've got you a difficult question on that in a minute, but Joe, let's go.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, just what's interesting is if you're having difficulty convincing government to focus on nature and the environment, how on earth are us farmers going to be able to do that? But especially when we've got a government that is quite overtly hostile to landowners and managers. But farmers, I think they want to do more, but they will not do more if the funding is not there. And it's been seen lately where SFIs and mid-tiers are coming to an end, cliff edge, and right, what we got to do, first thing, let's take out margins. And all that good work, which might be decades, is undone. And I think farmers need that certainty. But with the new SFI, which should be coming and be announced soon, I don't know what soon is, but it's said to be more targeted. Can you elaborate on what that targeting will be and what you think the future schemes will look like?
Thanks, Jane.
So unfortunately, I can't, on the grounds of not having been cited on all these recent changes that, you know, some of the specialists at Natural England will be working with the DEFRA teams in helping to design these things, but it's really for ministers to sign that off and then put it out of the door in due course. But, you know, totally sympathise in the sense of there not being this continuity or certainty of policy over now quite a long period. It goes back to what we were saying a moment ago. I mean, you know, the last government invented the SFI, new government came in, the money had run out for, you know, for reasons that probably should have been anticipated by the previous government. New government had to stop it and look at what they were going to do with it in the future to make it financially sustainable as well as better targeted. And so that work is going on, and you've heard it's coming quite soon, have you? I've not heard.
No, whoever says.
Yeah. Well, yes. I don't know the exact answer to that, but like everyone else in the room, you know, we see it went off a cliff edge, there's been a delay, and something will be announced in due course. And then, of course, there's countryside stewardship, which has been in abeyance as well at the same time, and we've been waiting for some certainty to emerge on that. But it's successive changes of administrations and ministers, I'm afraid, is part of the reason why we've had this. And it's complicated. I mean, there's some people, you know, working flat out and full time in DEFRA trying to work through all of these challenges to get it to a place where it can work and it can be good value for the taxpayer as well as being useful for the farmers. And so they're still working on it, evidently.
it's quite sort of monumental kind of breach of trust, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the problem. You find
Yeah.
that in terms of how you're engaging with farmers now as well?
I think most farmers see the difference between government and Natural England. So, we are the delivery body. We work on the ground and our people are, in contact with farmers on a one-to-one basis, helping them to navigate schemes, whether that be countryside stewardship or landscape recovery. And government is the one that is making the policy choices and deciding on the funding. And we don't decide that. We advise, but we don't decide, and that's the difference between Natural England and government. And so, that's the separation.
Time for some good decisions. Question over here.
Thanks. Wendy Brooks from Norfolk County Council. In a few months' time, we're going to have a new mayor in Norfolk and Suffolk. What do you think the opportunities are, Tony, for nature recovery or landscape adaptation in terms of devolution? And maybe government money for agri-environment should be devolved to the mayor to be delivered locally. What do you think?
Well, I think probably in the end it will depend on the mayor and who you choose to elect. It's a bit like the national politics, isn't it? If you get people who are passionate and understand these subjects and want to do something about it, you're going to get more progress than if you get someone who denies the science of climate change in a leadership position. And, you can see the difference between countries that have a leader who wants to act on climate change and countries that don't. And, you get a microcosm of that at the level of a mayoralty. That's just the simple kind of consequence of political choices, isn't it, in terms of who we elect. Assuming you get good people who are elected and who want to make integrated, joined-up decisions whereby public health, environment, resilience are all joined together, then there are huge opportunities with the mayors. And some of the changes that will go on with local government reforms, putting more decision-making down for spatial planning to mayors, I mean, this could be a huge opportunity should we all choose to elect people who are interested and want to make progress on these subjects. On the question of devolving Elm, I've not heard that before. I don't know what the formula would be in terms of how you divide up the farming budget to allocate it to counties. I suppose you could come up with a formula to do that. I've not heard that, though.
I know the last farming minister was a big fan of thinking about making it as local as possible, in the sense that you could then design options that were relevant to the farming systems locally, rather than kind of perhaps the European approach, which was to have a big one-size-fits-all type scheme. But the reality of delivering something more complex is really where systems fall down, presumably, because it's all about delivery, right?
Yeah, it is. I'm just wondering whether the gentleman's question here a moment ago about the uncertainty and the complexity and the difficulty, whether we make that problem worse or better by devolving those budgets. I don't know the answer to that, but I think that would be an important question to look at. Would it be more efficient and would it be more effective if it were devolved that way or not?
The problem, and actually coming back to the conversation that we were having just before you came on stage with the big debate, is that if government isn't active in this space in terms of policy delivery for environmental outcomes, then the private sector just has to get on and innovate. And I see that's where the role of supply chains and agri-food supply chains becoming increasingly important, because they may not necessarily be driven by net zero targets or whatever that it might be, but increasingly they're massively motivated by resilience. And that resilience will be driving investment in farmers and in farming in a way that public money seems increasingly unable to do so. I mean, is it an opportunity?
I would hope so. I don't know if many supply chains are geared to being able to work in a way whereby farmer resilience would be the opportunity that's available to them. So quite a lot of markets, they're kind of commodities, aren't they? And you're not dealing with a particular farmer in a particular place. You're buying in a marketplace where supplies are aggregated. And so how you would create a relationship between a buyer and a farmer in a way whereby, that farmer is being incentivized to improve their soil, to maintain their biodiversity, how you gear between the market and that. In some cases, it probably could work, but quite a lot of markets don't work like that, do they? It's invisible in terms of the supply, and it's...
Absolutely, isn't exactly the reason why we're having that conversation, because it's happening, but there's this massive issue, particularly with rotational agriculture. We're almost out of time. So, Kate, is it super quick? Go on.
Thanks, Emily. Tony, is Natural England supportive of private finance being used to fill the funding gap that we've got? And if so, what more can Natural England do to convince the private sector in all of its forms to invest that money in what all of us here are trying to do?
So the answer is a massive yes. We do need much more money invested into sustainable agriculture and nature recovery. And there is quite a lot that can be done by government, I think, to encourage this. It's actually quite noticeable how, and I've been involved with this for quite a few years, in that kind of discussion around private sector investment into nature recovery, including some of these supply chain discussions. And yet, it is quite surprising how little money is still flowing into actual nature recovery. There's been a lot of talk, but not a lot of money. But where you do see money flowing, it's coming from where government has intervened and created a regulatory requirement for it. So biodiversity net gain, nutrient neutrality, some of the work we've been doing on being able to cope with recreational disturbance on protected areas by creating new green spaces for people to use. Money has gone into those because government has set a standard and a regulatory requirement for it. And so I do think the role of the, standards and accreditation that can be set by governments is really quite important for this. Because at the moment, I think you look around and people can see, broadly speaking, nature's got a value and we should be investing in it. But then there's a big level of risk and uncertainty between those basic facts and then people actually spending money on doing something about it. And that, I think, is where we could make most progress most quickly, is by setting standards and having some level of certainty for investors so that they know what they're investing in is actually a high quality activity that is doing what it says on the tin in terms of catching carbon or reducing flood risk or reducing nutrient pollution or whatever else it is. So, so the short answer is yes, we do need much more private sector investment, but I think we're going to have to do much more work in creating the conditions for it to flow in, because at the moment, the talk isn't matching the money.
Tony, on that, and just to take one extra minute, I mean, the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, as it's currently drafted, and gives Natural England an expanded delivery role alongside its statutory functions, and sort of thinking about private finance and the creation of the Nature Recovery Fund within that. I mean, Natural England is going to be involved in streamlining delivery of investment into nature way more. But as the commentary is focused, it puts there is a risk of a conflict of interest there in terms of what you're taking the money for, and then what you're investing it in being kind of, determinant of both sides of that. So how are you planning to safeguard the organisation's scientific independence and maintain public trust whilst doing those assessments? I mean, you are now, Natural England is now launched right into this delivery space.
I don't think it's a conflict of interest. I mean, this is our work. We are a science-led organisation that implements the law and pursues government policy on behalf of government. And this will be another place where we do it, is in assessing the impact of housing and other infrastructure development on nature, and then being able to design a plan that will compensate for that in a way which is meeting the ecological requirements that arise from the damage that's being caused, and then the money will be raised from the developer and then it will be spent on delivery. I don't think it's a conflict of interest. I think it's just really complicated is the problem with it.
Okay.
Or the challenge, not a problem.
Okay.
Challenge.
Well,
we don't have problems at Natural England, we have challenges.
Thank you. It's been a very informative and rapid run through of some of the issues that are going on at the moment, and I'm really, really grateful that you've been here today to be able to join us. Please thank Tony.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Yes, please.